I want to make mention of a couple things that are important for us to take note of. This week, certainly on Tuesday, we'll be celebrating Veterans Day. This is always a great time for us to acknowledge the sacrifice of men and women and their families who've served our country and continue to serve our country or have served our country as veterans. So we want to just say thank you to you guys and really express our appreciation. We are fortunate to be close, with Lejeune and everything. We have a lot of overlap, and we are very grateful for the sacrifice and know firsthand of what what's required of that. So we're very grateful. It's a great time for us to acknowledge that. The other thing that we need to be aware of is tomorrow, November 10th, is the 126th anniversary of the Wilmington coup. Some of you may or may not even be familiar with that. I'll talk more about this later on in the message, but tomorrow marks a significant day in the history of our city, and part of what I want to do is to look at this in the lens of redemption. We don't just acknowledge things so we can feel better about ourselves. We name things and acknowledge things, we can better understand them. That prepares us to enter into those things. Part of the challenge that we face, just as people who tend to have a lot of access to things that make our lives more and more comfortable and more insulated and isolated from what the rest of the world, most of the world experiences, is that we can find ourselves in places where we just don't have to really care about certain things. I don't mean that derogatory, it's just a matter of fact. We don't have to be bothered by things that plague or plight other people. It's one of the things that we work on as pastors and our team here at the church is we have two things. We want to learn how to see. We want to learn how to see the metaphors that Jesus used. When he looked out on the world, he said they are bewildered and they're hapless. They're like sheep without a shepherd. He would look out on the world and he would say, the fields are white unto harvest. And we have this vision in our minds of fields that are white unto harvest, like, oh, this is a chance for mass conversion. That's not what it was talking about. Not what Jesus was talking about. We need a way to see things differently. And the way we see things, ultimately what it does is it's useful for us to be able to cultivate compassion, to have our hearts moved by things that we see, to cultivate compassion. This has been a steep learning curve for me. And so part of what I want to do today is you're going to have to listen very carefully. Today's got a little bit of complexity to it. I'm going to say some things very deliberately, so I want you to listen very carefully so as not to, to miss hear what I'm saying, but also I want you to consider some things very deeply. This is not a message you're going to go, oh, I got it, and now I know how to apply it to my life. This is going to take us generations to understand, but it's going to start with where we are today. So if we're good with that, that's what we're going to try to do. All right, fair? Perfect. I'll do my best. One of the things that I find interesting is as I read the Bible, is there's a lot, especially the Psalms are just wild. And it goes from one day like cursing enemies to the next day proclaiming blessings on the whole world. And what always is interesting to me, especially as I've been doing this for a long time, is how sweeping these promises are. And I want you to just hear this. This is from Psalm 67. May the Lord be gracious to us and bless us. We all have a vision for this. May the Lord be gracious to us and bless us. May his face shine upon us. And then he says, so that, may God's face shine upon us so that his ways may be known upon the earth. That your salvation known to all the nations. May all the peoples rise up and praise you. May all the nations rise up and be glad and sing for joy, for you rule over all the people with equity and with justice, and you guide the nations of the earth. And it's interesting how sweeping these blessings are. This is the original promise to Abraham, that God would bless Abraham so that through him the whole world will be blessed. That somehow what we are as God's people is we are conduits of God's blessing. We receive and it goes in and through us and out into the world to bless other people, so that the whole earth will be filled with this glory. That's the language of the scriptures. The whole earth will be filled with this glory. What does that look like? What does that mean? And what does the church have to do with this? So I want to look at this passage in Acts chapter 2. And this is a really interesting passage. People have used this. This is kind of the beginning of the church. And so I want to read this. I want to ask you some questions as we kind of walk through this and see if there's anything. Now let me make one more comment. When you're reading the Bible, Luke is perhaps one of the most precise historians in all of ancient literature. I mean, his writing is very it's very succinct. There are a lot of details in there, and there's a lot of patterns that we need to identify. A lot of people believe that a lot of what Luke is writing in the opening of Acts has connections to Mount Sinai. So Mount Sinai is when the Ten Commandments are given, right? The mountain quakes, and there's fire, and there's thunder, and God's voice booms. And then what you have in Acts is you have the tongues of fire and the wind blowing, and you have a lot of these similar imageries from the upper room to Mount Sinai. And so I want you to see this as you think about this, because here's what we read in Acts chapter 2, verse 41. Peter preaches this message, and then it says the whole thing begins to, here's how it's described. I'll just read it to you. Acts chapter 2, verse 41. Those who accepted Peter's message were baptized. And then it says this, about 3,000 people were added to their number that day. Why is that in there? I've been to church conferences, so I know people try to use this to justify big churches. See, they counted numbers, so we count numbers. Were there 3,000? Was it 2,999 and they rounded up to 3,000? Or like a lot of ministers do, was it like 2,200, they rounded it up to 3,000? Right? What was it? Was it 3,004? You ever wonder this? Probably not at all. You're like, never even thought of it. So think about what happens. If you go back to Mount Sinai, the law is given. The law is given, and there's thunder, and there's fire, and there's swirling, and Moses receives these 10 commands from God. And he comes down off of the mountain, and he finds the people have already forsaken their allegiance to God and erected a golden calf, and they're dancing around it. This is all from Exodus 30, 1, 32, 33, 34. It's through that whole section, starting in chapter 20. And they're dancing on the calf, and Moses is furious. He's like, you couldn't even handle it. So him and Aaron, they kind of go at it for a minute. And basically the way that God's going to resolve, the way this is going to get resolved is Moses calls the Levites together, and he says, go and attack your brothers. This is in the Bible. And so they go, and there's a slaughter in the encampment after the worshiping of the golden calf, the giving of the law, the golden calf, and then brother turns on brother, and there's a slaughter. And look at what it says in Exodus chapter 32. Verse 28. And the sons of Levi did as Moses commanded, and about 3,000 people were killed. How do we read the Bible? Is this just like cross God, people die? Is that really how we apply this? Like what is happening here? He goes back, those who accepted his message were baptized, and about 3,000 were saved. Paul would write like this, he said, the Spirit gives life, the law kills. 2 Corinthians 3, the whole chapter. So think about this, there's this pattern, this redemptive thing that we're seeing, this reversal. The law is given, and 3,000 people are slaughtered. The Spirit is given, and 3,000 people are saved. We're meant to make these connections. We're meant to see redemption. We're meant to see reversal of things. This is also in the book of Acts. Many of you have heard this, right? You know what happened when Peter preached this message? It said that there were all these people there, and they all heard their language, or heard this message in their own language. This is the unification of language as the gift of tongues. Do you know what happened in Genesis chapter 11 when man tried to make a name for himself and build the Tower of Babel up into the heavens to say, look at us, we have made this in our own image? It's the very thing that God made us into. They have claimed for themselves. He scatters their language. And what you have is in this coming together, this birth of the Ecclesia, the beginning of the new creation where God's Spirit would once again breathe into us the very life we've been created to have. We have this sort of reversal. This is the vision of redemption that you and I need. He goes on and he continues. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. We've talked about this a lot. To fellowship, the breaking of the bread, to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. Then it gets good. And all the believers were together. And they had everything in common, and they sold their property and their possessions. Now, what do you do with that? I'll tell you what I did with it most of my life. I ignored it. Because it smacked of some things that I didn't like. Last week, I challenged us to consider some things. The Ecclesia is to be called out of our private life and into a common life. And here what we see is that all the believers are together. They sold their property and their possessions, and they just shared their stuff together. And I remember growing up, I'm a child of the 80s. I grew up in the height of the Cold War. I listened to 1999, right? I know it. Right? Everybody's got a bomb. We'll all die anyway. So tonight I'm going to party like it's 1999, right? I remember those days. And it always felt like the world was on the precipice of falling apart. And there was two sort of enemies. And anything that reeked of communism or socialism was like immediate. And please don't read into this. I know we had an election last week. I wrote this 2 weeks ago. So this is before this. Because language like this for us as American Christians is very troubling. That we could sort of consider common life or common stuff because we've always been so afraid that it sounds like socialism or communism. And what we all knew is, right, that capitalism was on God's side and that communism was on Satan's side. And so that was kind of that was the battle lines and on the road to Armageddon in order to fight this culture war. Right? That's what's happened over the last 30, 40 years. And so we resist this. And my question is, what does this mean? Like, what has happened to us? There's two problems. Number one is we have forced the kingdom of God into a system that we already know, rather than considering it to be something different, right? You've heard me say this a million times, left and the right, or what? Two sides of the same coin in the what? Y'all haven't heard me say this ever? In the wrong system. And what I'm trying to get us to understand is like we have to have a vision and an imagination for a system that God actually intends for us to live in. The systems that we live in are not benign. The other problem with this idea of fear is this: we read it in the Bible. This is what the Bible actually gives us to say these images are not about numbers. They're about vision. They're about a vision of redemption and helping us get that. It's about what happens as new creatures begin to get vision for a new creation so that our lives become the answer to the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray, that his will would be done here on earth, that the earth would be filled with his glory as it is in heaven through his people, that our lives are designed to be blessings that are conduits of blessing that come in of and out of us. And what we need a vision for this sweeping view of salvation. You know, I've been kind of hammering on this for about the last 10 or so years. But that when we reduce the gospel to be about what happens to you after you die, and it becomes about conversion, the Sermon on the Mount really doesn't matter that much. But if the gospel is about God's glory and the redemption and the reunification and the salvation, the deliverance of all things, that God is on the cross reconciling all things to himself, then all of a sudden these teachings of Jesus and these implications of a common life start to matter immensely for God's glory to fill the earth. Again, that is the language of the Bible. This is not like Mike making stuff up. I just read it. It is that the whole earth will be filled with his glory. That is the end of all things. When heaven and earth reunite, the whole earth will once again be filled with his glory because it will all be one place and thing once again. We need a vision for resourcefulness. And I'm gonna leave you with more questions than answers today. But we've got to learn how to be resourceful, because like I thought about, so am I supposed to just, do we read this Bible? I'm supposed to sell my house and then just give it to the church. Well, you know what happens if I do that? I'm coming to live with one of y'all, right? It ain't gonna help anything. So that's not a great solution. So what do I do? How do I learn how to take what I have been entrusted with and use it and offer it for a common kind of life? Like, these are the questions that we have to wrestle with, particularly, if you have more than you need. I think of myself like this: I have more than I need, but it's not enough, right? Do you feel that? So it's like, what do we do with this? We have to learn, we have to have a vision for resourcefulness. How do we allow ourselves to be channels of blessing? We have to have a vision for justice and for redemption, for common good and collective flourishing. And this means we have to look into places that we don't want to look in and consider things that we don't want to consider. Because the intention of God's church is that the earth would be filled with His glory through the lives that we lead. So I got a couple big ideas I want to give you. I want to remind you again that systems, all of us have systems. We live in systems, they affect us more than we imagine that they do. You have a system for probably almost everything you do. This is why sometimes you don't get along with your spouse, because your system of cleaning the kitchen is different from her system of cleaning the kitchen, and it creates friction. And you can't understand why she doesn't do things like you do. At least that's what I feel in my household. So Julie has a great solution. She's like, I ain't gonna clean the kitchen then, knock yourself out. So I have my own system and it works. But there are systems of how we buy houses and sell land and buy cars and shop. There are systems at play all over the place. It is interesting, this is a side note, that a lot of the idea of the spiritual warfare is tied to this idea of principalities and these ruling authorities. They're systemic. And we can do a deep dive on that later on. But here's the system of the world. What I have to assume is you believe there is a system of the world. There's a system in which the world operates. And a lot of us have gotten good. We know how to use it. And so we've gotten along well in it. And again, this is not a critique of saying this is bad. This is saying this is what is. But here's my observation of it. This is big idea number one. The system of the world exploits the fractures, the fissures, the divisions, and the brokenness of humans and human relationships. They exploit that, right? The way in which you get something across is to say, you should never be satisfied with that. Your skin could look like this. And it exploits your insecurity about your face, and so you buy it. Or whatever it is. Does that make sense? Like, everything is about exploiting the fact that we have these broken places in our lives, in our relationships. Don't let that person get ahead of you, right? And so that exploits that thing, that fracture, that fissure, and says, now I can get you to do something. That's the way the world works. It's how politics works. I mean, right? That's the low-hanging fruit. But it's actually everywhere. But the Ecclesia of Jesus, those who are called out and into, are called to do something different. The language is like this: there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God. There's something that flows into this world and through this world that brings delight and joy into this rule and reign of God, moving and filling those places that are normally exploited and used. And this ecclesia, and we've used this, we talked about this last week, this thing that we view as the church when it comes to our mission and evangelism, how we see these things, and this is on our statement of beliefs page. It's part of, It's part of what we mean to work out our salvation, to understand what we are supposed to do and be in this particular world at this particular time. And the church is entrusted with the ministry of reconciliation. That is clear from the scriptures. On the cross, God was reconciling the world to himself, and he has entrusted the church the ministry of reconciliation. Well, what does that look like? We go, well, I don't know. So we need to figure it out. That's what I'm suggesting. That we are seeking to be a part of this movement that gathers people of all ages and culture and ethnicity and religious backgrounds and social positioning to honor the dignity and the unsurpassable worth of human beings made in the image of God. That we are compassionately for the world, not against it. We're for the world. Arising from faith, our activity, redemptive activity, is to be for the good of the world around us. It looks like salt and light and yeast and fragrance. And so this is actually, and I can't get this out of my brain. When you ask me about the church, this is what I'm likely to say. There's a prayer in Ephesians chapter 1, and Paul's like, Jesus has been established. He's seated above every name. He rules above every power or dominion. And then he says this in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 22. And God has placed all things under his feet. God has placed what? So what is there that isn't underneath his rule? Nothing. Nothing. And he has appointed him to be head over everything for the Ecclesia. He has called us out of a private life and into a common life to bring something of a rule and a reign that looks like heaven here on earth. And I know you're like, what is he gonna stop talking about this? Never, right? Because we have to see this, or else we're not going to understand what it actually means to be a Christian, which is baffling to me. I grew up in this. This has not been the way it was talked about to me. But this is everywhere in the Bible. It's everywhere. Then he says this, so he's set up everything for this ecclesia, which is his body. So we are the representation of him, the fullness of all that he is. Look at what he's called us to do. Who fills what? Every crack, every fissure, every broken place. We fill everything, and just to be clear, how? In every possible way. That's the vision of the ecclesia. That's how we are supposed to be. We need a working model for this, right? That's what Joseph D'Souza challenged. Says God expects us to be a working model. I'm like, what is that? So I started answering the question. We looked at this last week, right? To be a kind of people who live a kind of life, this common kind of life, for a kind of world that we long for, but can scarcely imagine. We, as humans, and all of us, have abdicated our responsibility to create things. We've abdicated that responsibility. We are called with God to contribute and to continue to produce and to bring culture into the world, beauty into the world. And we failed to recognize the divine power of what we actually contribute as people who bear his image. And what we've done is we've received, I think we've taken on the foundational consequence of sin. We've taken it on, and we've turned it into a value. You know what it is? The foundational consequence of sin, yes, it's death. It's the trajectory towards us, but it's separation. It's the pulling apart of things that were intended to be together, including people. And we've turned it into a value of individualism, and so we fight for our individual rights. And we value our individual pursuit of happiness above all things. And we've lost sight that we were actually created to live as a people, as a community, connected and cooperating with one another. And we forgo, in doing so, we forgo the beauty and the dignity of humanity for these practical and useful functions that we think we're supposed to serve. So this is the tedious part. So I want you to stay with me, and I promise I'll be done on time. So much of our life and our efforts is to ensure that we perform well, that we build the right credentials and the right resumes to support what it is that we are going to do. And this starts very early on. What we are going to do. You ask a kid a question, a do question, they'll give you a be answer. What do you want to do when you grow up? I want to be an architect. We, in and of ourselves, have become a means to an end. And often it's someone else's end. Our employment, sometimes even our relationships, or we are just a means to that person's or that company's success or happiness or whatever. We've even coined terms like trophy wife and all these other things that we have that say that exact thing. We have done this to ourselves because we contribute to this. We just don't have a vision for what it is to simply be in this world, that it's just enough that you're here and that you exist and that you have dignity and that you have worth apart from what it is that you produce. So our humanness, the very fact that we are human beings, becomes one more thing to be bargained with, bought, and sold, sometimes by others, sometimes by our own selves. Exploited, right? That's what systems do. Exploiting our efforts, exploiting our bodies, exploiting our desires. This is the system that continues to dehumanize all of us. And such is the system of the world. Feeling good? There is hope, and I'm gonna tell you what it is in just a minute. Big idea number 2. The world we create isn't simply a function of what we produce. Here's what I mean. The world is a byproduct of the kind of people that we are and the kind of people that we become. It is our character. Like you can trace, I don't have time to, you get the idea. We, as humans, have been given a vocation to, this is what I love about the scriptures and about the gospel. We've been given a vocation to bear God's image and to cultivate the world that he's created, to contribute to it in line and in light of what God has done and who he is. Like all those things are still true about us. But what's happened is we have forsaken, especially in the church, we've forsaken our call to be culture makers and have taken up the mantle to be culture warriors. And this is a fundamentally failed strategy. The Ecclesia of Jesus is precisely that. We are called out of a private life into a common life. We are a kind of people who are learning to live a kind of life, right? We sell our possessions and we make things available. Now, I don't know how we're gonna pull that off. Don't hear me saying that's my suggestion this morning. I'm just saying we need to consider it. But we establish new patterns. And when we learn to live like this, we will establish new patterns. We will establish new ways of relating to people and to others. We will do that. I have friends who this is how they live their lives. They have established new patterns in the way they do business and commerce, and it's relational and it's high trust. I have seen this happen. I've seen it happen very successfully. But we begin to find these redemptive ways of participating and bringing the kind of culture that God intends, salt and light and leaven and fragrance. We bring it into the world, into the places that we are. I've mentioned this, I'm gonna put it on the screen one more time, but radical cooperation is the definition I'm working off of. And this is where people think, I still hold I'm a capitalist and I'm not an anarchist, so please don't think I'm advocating the kingdom. That's what I'm advocating. And we're gonna have to think of this very differently. Radical cooperation is our willingness to work together for common good and collective flourishing, which we need vision for, in ways that defy conventional wisdom. So we say, oh, that's how it's always done. Well, that's not an argument anymore for us. We're gonna say, what does redemptive activity look like, right? What does common good and collective flourishing look like? That's gonna be the vision we're gonna start making decisions by. We defy conventional wisdom and we subvert unjust systems that preserve the status quo. Now, you don't subvert systems by destroying them or overthrowing things. Like, please hear me. But you establish new ways of relating to people. You establish new ways of relating to people, to one another. You work to build trust and radical cooperation as we work for the redemption and the renewal of all things, this reversal, to get vision for this. How many have questions about what I'm saying? You should have about 1,000. Ask them. We're gonna, like, when I sat down, I was like, Lord, this is what I'm seeking, this is what I'm praying, this is what I'm asking, this is what I'm knocking. I'm knocking to try and say, God, can you show us what this looks like? We need a vision for collective flourishing. And we need a vision that is compelling enough for the sacrifice that is required. That's gonna be tough. To be for the world, the redemption of all things, we need eyes to see and to better understand what we are to actually be in this world. We have not simply been created to produce things, but we've been created to contribute something of ourselves, of who we are as a people. Because again, the world bears the fruit of our character, not just our effort. As I mentioned earlier, I grew up in the height of the Cold War, which is also the height of some of the best music ever known to human beings. I'm way in on Tears for Fears right now. But one of my favorite movies came out, I think in the late 80s, Dead Poets Society. I believe it's late 80s, maybe early 90s. Dead Poets Society, anybody seen it? It's a fantastic movie. Other than Disney, it's about the only other movie I'll probably watch. But John Keating is an English teacher at this high-end prep school where everybody comes to be lawyers and doctors and to kind of take their mantle and to bring what they're supposed to bring to the world, right? They're prestigious kids. And John Keating is a poet, and he's teaching them how to feel and to be alive. And remember, this is where Carpe Diem, he reads, and they're all like, what is this dude? He reads them Walt Whitman. He tells them to tear the introductory poem, Introduction to Poetry, out of their books because it just talks about rhyme and meter, and you gotta, here's how you do this verse, and that's like this how to write a poem. He's like, I get rid of that stuff. You gotta feel this. And there's this great moment. I wish I could, this is honestly why I changed my major to English, because I'm gonna change the world like John Keating. And he gathers them all around. And he pulls in, because they're having to stand up on the chair and read poetry. And they're like reading it through, a captain, my captain, whatever, they're reading all this stuff through. And then he pulls them all together and he whispers to them and he says, we don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race. Some of you who saw the movie, you're feeling this right now, aren't you? And members of the human race are filled with passion, and medicine and law and business and engineering. These are noble pursuits and they are necessary to sustain life. But poetry and beauty and romance and love, these are what we stay alive for. We need a vision that is big enough to call out the life that you've been created to live. To quote from Walt Whitman, he continues. That was my injection of that. O me, O life, of the questions of these reoccurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish. What good amid these rise, O me, O life? Answer that you are here, that life exists in identity, and that the powerful play goes on, that you may contribute a verse. And then he pauses and he looks at all the young men around the room. And he says, that powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. What will your verse be? I'm going, oh, man, I'm like, because you can feel it. You can feel it. You listen to a great song and you can feel it. We need to be moved by great things, moved by beauty. And a lot of us haven't beheld the glory and the greatness and the beauty of God and the glory of Christ on the cross and resurrection in a way that moves us the way Taylor Swift can. And it's only because, not because Taylor Swift's not great, it's because we haven't developed eyes to see beyond that. Open the eyes of my heart, right? That's the prayer. The life that we long for, the kind of life that we long to behold, is more than just a function of efficiency or pragmatism, which is how most of us think and live and act and structure our lives. That makes everything a means to an end, and we reduce our sacred call and our vocation to a commodity to be sold, and we become consumers. And such is the system we live in. We have to see and cultivate compassion. And we have to see clearly enough to be moved deeply enough, to move into hellish places and to be able to bring something of God's glory and greatness into these, to fill everything in every way. We have to grapple with the brokenness of the world. We have to grapple with it. It's easy to put your head in the sand and pretend like, well, that ain't me. And you're right, it may not be you, but it is us. So here's how I want to share this. Tomorrow is November 10th. Marks 127 years since the Wilmington Massacre on November the 10th, 1898, if you're not familiar. Armed white supremacists overthrew the duly elected government of our city, and at gunpoint replaced them with a new alderman and a new mayor. This remains, to this day, the only successful coup in the United States of America, the only one. Most people don't even know this. The makeup of Wilmington in that day was forever changed, even to this day. This event was largely ignored for almost a century, wasn't acknowledged until the late 1990s, mid-1990s. And in that we've been kind of trying to come to grips with the history of the city that we live in, with this particular region. One of our efforts as a church in terms of our vision for redemption, how do we bring redemption in the city, the reversal in our city, how do these things affect us? We've decided it includes racial healing. And we've worked really hard over the last probably almost 20 years to better understand our role as a church in contributing to the process of healing and the redemptive work of our city. It's been years of conversations and building relationships and building friendships and entering in, cultivating compassion, learning how to see. And so what I wanted to share with you is each year there's a clergy luncheon that comes together to commemorate these events of the 1898 massacre and coup, and where we work together and continue to grapple with the implications of that event. And this year, I just want to let you know, I've been selected to deliver the speech at this luncheon. And it is perhaps one of the most humbling honors I have had in 30 years of ministry, to step into this space and to try and offer something of beauty and of reconciliation. And these are opportunities, though, for us to learn and participate in one of the most poignant places of healing and redemption for our city and our region. I really believe that. And so what does redemption look like in all these complex things? I don't fully know. What I'm telling you is we have to be willing to enter in and to find proximity to these things and cultivate compassion. That the church, to fill everything in every way, doesn't sit idle, but it moves into, right? It's like an estuary. You know what an estuary is, right? It's the brackish water and the salt water coming together, and we live in one, right? That's what all the backwaters are. And like estuaries where rivers meet oceans, it's a place of tremendous disruption. There's a lot of things that happen in those overlapping spaces. But it's also a place of the abundance of new life and powerful formation. Mikado Fujimura wrote a book called Culture Care. It's a beautiful book, but it's a book about the power of beauty and tending to the complexity of redemption and the power of generativity. The things are generative. They produce more out of themselves. Blessings come through and they move outward and become more than they were. Estuaries are complex and they're nuanced. There's agitation and irritation and volatility as the rivers of living water sort of come against the tides of the system of the world. They hold off often what would ultimately destroy. They do that. They keep things from being destroyed. But in this overlapping space, there's powerful formation and tremendous new life is created in these places. And there's surprising abundance and breathtaking beauty. This is why people drive down and take pictures over the marshes and send drones up, because it's spectacular. There's a beauty that moves us and we feel it. And it says, oh, this is why we're alive. This isn't a byproduct. It's not a byproduct. This beautiful way of life actually becomes the experience of the Ecclesia who are willing to try and move into these places. And the culture that we get to create, it's not sustainable. It's generative. When you stop having to fight for culture, instead recognizing when you build it, it invades and pervades into all the broken places, it is a spectacularly beautiful thing, worth whatever sacrifice might be required. And such is the kingdom of God, and such is the Ecclesia of Jesus. That's what we're supposed to be. So what do? I wrote this down. I'm gonna put it on the board. You can take a picture of it and let it haunt you for the next 5 years. We need to become catalysts, these estuaries, these places of abundance and new life. A kind of people living a kind of life together in such a way that we inadvertently and quite naturally create and contribute to a subversive system, to subversive systems and structures that act as filters and irritants and seawalls against the undercurrent of utilitarianism and commodification and exploitation that undermine what it means to be human and to bear the image of God as He has intended for us to be. He has made Christ the head of all things and put Him over the church. And then He promises to fill us with this kind of life, so that where the world exploits the broken places, the church fills them, and they teem with new life and abundance and beauty. Father, would you forgive us? We have made the church about how many people or how many programs or cool things or any other games that we play to try and avoid this call to a common life. Most of our world is in poverty, and most of our world is hurting every day. We have systems that continue to exploit that. So would you give us vision? Would you give us the courage to ask questions, to seek and to ask and to knock, as we seek first your kingdom and your righteousness? Thank you for your grace and your faithfulness. And I pray all these things in the name of your Son, Jesus, who is our King.